Margaret Williams had spent 37 years perfecting her Christmas traditions. Every ornament had its place, every recipe had been tested and refined, and every family gathering followed a carefully orchestrated plan that brought joy to 3 generations. But when her daughter-in-law Jessica called her holiday preparations too much work, Margaret realized it was time to make some changes that nobody saw coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first snow of December had just begun to dust the windowsills of Margaret's colonial home in Westfield, Connecticut, when her phone rang. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron before answering, expecting it to be her neighbor asking about the annual cookie exchange. "Hi, Margaret, it's Jessica." Her daughter-in-law's voice carried that familiar tone of barely concealed irritation that had become all too common over the past few years. Margaret settled into her kitchen chair, already sensing this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. "Hello, dear. How are you and Michael doing? That's actually why I'm calling. We need to talk about Christmas this year." Margaret glanced at her kitchen counter, where she'd already laid out ingredients for 5 different types of cookies. The recipe cards, some yellowed with age and splattered with decades of use, were arranged in the precise order she'd follow over the next 3 days. Her grandmother's handwritten notes for German Stollen sat beside her mother's carefully preserved instructions for English toffee. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Jessica's sigh was audible through the phone. "Look, Margaret, I know how much you love doing all this Christmas stuff, but honestly, it's become too much work for everyone. Michael and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to simplify things." Margaret felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the December weather. "Simplify how?" "Well, for starters, maybe we could just order cookies from a bakery instead of making them from scratch. And instead of that elaborate Christmas Eve dinner you always insist on, we could just do something casual. Pizza, maybe. The kids won't care." Margaret's eyes moved to the dining room, visible through the kitchen doorway, where her grandmother's china cabinet displayed the same set of dishes that had graced Christmas tables for over a century. The delicate blue and white patterns had witnessed countless family celebrations, first in her grandmother's home in Boston, then in her mother's house in Springfield, and now here in Westfield. "The children always seem to enjoy helping with the cookies," Margaret said carefully. "Little Emma was so excited last year when she helped roll out the sugar cookies." "That's just it, though. Emma's 8 now, and Tyler's 10. They're more interested in their tablets and video games than standing around in a hot kitchen. And honestly, Margaret, it puts so much pressure on Michael and me to keep them entertained while you're bustling around doing everything yourself." Margaret thought about last Christmas Eve, how Emma had stood on the step stool beside her, carefully placing a candied cherry on each thumbprint cookie. The little girl had been so proud when Margaret let her arrange them on the special Christmas platter, the one with painted holly leaves that Margaret's mother had used for the same purpose 50 years earlier. "I see," Margaret said, though she wasn't sure she did. "And what about Christmas morning? The stockings and the gift exchange?" "Well, that's another thing. Do we really need to do stockings for everyone? I mean, Michael and I are adults, and maybe instead of everyone bringing multiple gifts, we could just do a simple Secret Santa thing. It would save everyone money and stress." Margaret's gaze drifted to the living room mantel, where 7 stockings hung in perfect order. Her own stocking, knitted by her mother when she was 5, hung next to her late husband Robert's, which she'd kept up even in the 3 years since his passing. Michael's stocking, sewn with love when he was born 32 years ago, hung beside Jessica's, a beautiful needlepoint creation Margaret had worked on for months before their wedding. Emma and Tyler's stockings, each carefully crafted during Jessica's pregnancies, completed the family row. "The children do seem to enjoy finding their little surprises in their stockings," Margaret ventured. "Sure, but they get so many presents anyway. And let's be honest, most of the stocking stuffers just end up forgotten in their rooms within a week." Margaret remembered Tyler's face last Christmas morning when he'd found the small wooden train in his stocking, carved by Margaret's neighbor who worked as a woodcrafter. The boy had carried it with him for the entire day, even insisting it sit beside his plate during dinner. But perhaps Jessica was right. Perhaps she was remembering selectively. "What does Michael think about all this?" Margaret asked. "He agrees. Completely. He's actually the one who brought up how exhausted you always look after Christmas. He's worried about you, Margaret. You're 73 years old, and you're trying to maintain these elaborate traditions like you're still 30. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to ask the rest of us to keep up with it all." Margaret stood and walked to her kitchen window, looking out at her backyard where Robert's workshop still stood. Inside that small building were bins full of decorations accumulated over decades, hand-carved nativity figures that Robert had made during their early marriage years, strings of lights that had illuminated their home for 30 Christmases, ornaments collected from family vacations, school craft projects, and holiday bazaars stretching back to when Michael was in kindergarten. "I never thought of it as asking anyone to keep up with anything," Margaret said quietly. "I thought we were sharing traditions." "But that's just it, Margaret. They're your traditions. Emma and Tyler don't have any attachment to your grandmother's recipes or your mother's china. To them, it's just a bunch of old stuff and complicated rules about how everything has to be done exactly the right way." Margaret's throat felt tight. "Michael grew up with these traditions. He used to love helping me decorate the tree, and he always said the homemade cookies were better than anything you could buy." "People change, Margaret. Michael's priorities are different now. He has his own family to think about." The words hung in the air between them like ice crystals. Margaret watched a cardinal land on the bare branch of her oak tree, its red feathers bright against the gray December sky. Robert had always said cardinals were good luck, visitors from loved ones who had passed on. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Margaret asked. "Just something simple and relaxed. Maybe we could do Christmas at our house this year instead. Order some food, put up a small tree, exchange a few gifts. No pressure, no fuss, no having to worry about whether we're using the right serving spoons or sitting in the right chairs." Margaret had never assigned seating at her Christmas table, but she didn't say so. She thought about Jessica's house with its modern minimalist aesthetic, clean lines, neutral colors, and very little evidence that children lived there most of the time. It was beautiful in its own way, but it felt nothing like the warm, lived-in comfort of a family home shaped by decades of memories. "And if I wanted to continue some of the traditions here, for those who might be interested?" Jessica's pause was telling. "Margaret, I think you need to understand that we're all moving in a different direction. Michael and I want Christmas to be about relaxation and family time, not about elaborate productions and complicated expectations." Margaret closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see every Christmas morning for the past 10 years since Emma was born. The children racing down the stairs in their pajamas, their excited squeals when they saw what Santa had brought, the way they'd gathered around her piano while she played carols, their voices joining in on the familiar songs. She could see Michael, helping his father carve the turkey, both men laughing at some shared joke. She could see Jessica herself in earlier years, genuinely seeming to enjoy the traditions, even asking Margaret to teach her how to make the cranberry sauce that had been in the family for 3 generations. "When did it all become too much work?" Margaret asked, more to herself than to Jessica. "What do you mean?" "I'm just trying to understand when sharing family traditions became a burden instead of a joy." Jessica's voice took on that patient tone people use when they think they're dealing with someone who doesn't quite understand the modern world. "Margaret, I know this is hard for you to hear, but times change. People don't have the bandwidth for all these elaborate holiday productions anymore. We're all busy, we're all stressed. And honestly, the kids are just as happy with something simple." Margaret thought about Emma last year, carefully writing thank you notes on the special Christmas stationery Margaret had bought for her, taking time to draw little pictures on each one. She thought about Tyler asking if he could take some of the leftover cookies to his teacher, carefully selecting the prettiest ones to put in the container. "I suppose I hadn't realized everyone felt this way," Margaret said. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you do," Jessica said, her tone softening slightly. "It's just that maybe it's time to create some new traditions that work better for everyone. Something less complicated." After they hung up, Margaret sat in her kitchen for a long time, surrounded by the baking supplies she'd already purchased for the holiday season. 3 types of flour, vanilla beans she'd ordered from a specialty supplier, the good butter she only bought for Christmas baking. The silence in the house felt different somehow, heavier. She walked through her home, seeing it through Jessica's eyes. The antique furniture that had been in the family for generations might look old-fashioned to someone who preferred contemporary design. The carefully maintained collections of Christmas decorations might seem like clutter to someone who valued minimalism. The traditions that had brought her such joy might truly feel like obligations to people who hadn't grown up with them. Margaret climbed the stairs to her bedroom and sat at the small desk where she'd written Christmas cards for 40 years. The return address labels still read Robert and Margaret Williams, though she'd been meaning to order new ones since his death. She pulled out a piece of stationery and began making a list, but not the kind she usually made this time of year. Instead of writing down cookie recipes and gift ideas, she found herself writing down the names of everyone who had ever been part of her Christmas celebrations. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Her parents, both gone now, Robert's parents, who had welcomed her into their family traditions and encouraged her to blend them with her own. Neighbors who had joined them over the years when they had nowhere else to go. Friends from church who had become like family. She thought about Robert's nephew David, who lived in California now, but still called every Christmas morning to tell her how much he missed her Christmas cookies. She thought about her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived alone and had joined them for Christmas dinner for the past 5 years. She thought about Michael's college friends who used to visit during the holidays and always raved about the homemade food and warm atmosphere. Margaret realized that while Jessica saw the traditions as work, others had seen them as gifts. While her daughter-in-law viewed the elaborate preparations as burdensome expectations, others had experienced them as generous hospitality and loving care. She put down her pen and walked to Robert's workshop. The key was still hidden under the flower pot, where he'd always kept it, even though everyone knew where it was. Inside, surrounded by the organized chaos of his tools and projects, she found the boxes of Christmas decorations stored with his typical precision. Each box was labeled in his careful handwriting. Ornaments, 1990s. Lights, white. Nativity set, kitchen counter. Margaret opened the box labeled Emma and Tyler, handmade. Inside were small treasures collected over the years. A construction, paper angel Emma had made in kindergarten. A popsicle stick reindeer Tyler had crafted in 2nd grade. Photos of both children helping with various Christmas preparations, their faces bright with genuine joy and engagement. She thought about Jessica's words about the children not caring about old stuff and complicated rules, but the evidence in front of her suggested otherwise. These weren't the keepsakes of children who had been forced to participate in unwelcome traditions. These were the mementos of kids who had found meaning and joy in family rituals. Margaret sat down on Robert's old workbench and really considered what Jessica had said about Michael agreeing with her assessment. It was true that her son had seemed less engaged in recent years, often checking his phone during family gatherings or seeming distracted during conversations. But she had attributed that to the normal stresses of parenthood and career demands, not to any dissatisfaction with family traditions. She wondered if she had missed signs of his growing discontent, or if Jessica's perspective had gradually influenced his feelings about celebrations that had once brought him happiness. Either way, It was clear that the family dynamics she had cherished were changing in ways she hadn't fully recognized. As she sat in the quiet workshop, surrounded by the tools Robert had used to create so many of the decorations that made their home special during the holidays, Margaret began to see her situation with new clarity. The people she had been trying to please with her elaborate preparations were no longer finding joy in them. The traditions she had maintained out of love were being experienced as obligations by the very people she most wanted to bless. But Margaret also realized something else. She had been thinking about these traditions as belonging to the whole family, when perhaps they had always been more meaningful to her than to anyone else. The elaborate Christmas she created each year wasn't just for her children and grandchildren, it was also for herself, and for the memory of Robert, and for the continuation of family stories that stretched back through generations. The question now was what to do with that understanding. She could abandon the traditions that had given her life structure and meaning, accommodating Jessica's preference for simplicity. She could try to convince the family to maintain celebrations that some of them now viewed as burdensome. Or she could find a third option, one that honored both her own needs and the changing dynamics of her family. Margaret locked up the workshop and walked back to her house as the December afternoon faded into evening. She had some thinking to do and some decisions to make, but first, she was going to make herself a cup of tea using her grandmother's china teapot and sit by the window to watch the snow fall on the garden she and Robert had planted together 30 years ago. Tomorrow, she will start making some phone calls, but not the ones Jessica might expect. Margaret woke the next morning with unusual clarity. She had spent the evening making lists, not her typical Christmas preparation lists, but something entirely different. Names, phone numbers, and most importantly, a timeline. Her first call was to Harold Brennan, the attorney who had handled Robert's estate. Harold had been a family friend for over 20 years, and Margaret trusted his discretion completely. "Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you," Harold's warm voice came through the phone. "How are you holding up with the holidays approaching?" "Actually, Harold, that's exactly what I need to discuss with you. Do you have time to meet this week? I'd like to review my will and make some adjustments." Harold's tone shifted to professional. "Concern? Of course. Is everything all right? You're not having health issues, are you?" "No, nothing like that. But some family circumstances have changed, and I want to make sure my estate planning reflects my current situation accurately." They scheduled an appointment for Thursday afternoon. Margaret's next call was to her friend Patricia Morrison, who lived 2 towns over in Millbrook. Patricia had been widowed around the same time as Margaret, and they had maintained a close friendship built on shared experiences and mutual support. "Pat, I have a question for you. How would you and your daughter feel about joining me for Christmas this year?" Patricia's surprise was evident. "That's so generous of you, Margaret. But don't you always have Michael and his family over?" "Plans are changing this year. I'm thinking about doing something different, and I'd love to have people around who actually enjoy holiday traditions." "Well, Sarah would be thrilled. She's been dreading another quiet Christmas with just the 2 of us. Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble?" Margaret smiled for the first time in days. "Pat, it would be my absolute pleasure." Her third call was to David Williams, Robert's nephew in San Diego. David was a successful architect who had never married, and he made a point of calling on every major holiday to check on Margaret and reminisce about the family gatherings of his youth. "Aunt Margaret, this is a surprise. Don't tell me you're calling to give me grief about not visiting for Christmas again." "Actually, David, I'm calling to invite you. Would you consider flying out this year? I know it's short notice, but I'm planning something special." The pause on the other end told Margaret she had his attention. "Are you serious? I haven't been back for Christmas in 5 years." "I know, sweetheart, and I think it's time to change that. I'll cover your flight and you can stay in your old room upstairs. What do you say?" "Margaret, I would love nothing more. But what about Michael and the kids? Won't it be crowded? Margaret hesitated for just a moment. Let me worry about the logistics. Can you get the time off work? For your Christmas, I'll make it work. Next, Margaret called Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor. The 86-year-old woman answered on the second ring, as she always did. Eleanor, it's Margaret. I'm calling about Christmas plans. Oh dear. I hope I'm not imposing again this year. I know having an old lady around probably cramps everyone's style. Eleanor Patterson, don't you dare talk like that. You're family to me, and I'm calling to make sure you'll be joining us for Christmas Eve dinner and Christmas Day. But this year might be a little different. Different how? Well, we might have some new faces around the table, people who actually appreciate good food and meaningful traditions. Eleanor's laugh was delighted. Margaret Williams, you sound like you're up to something. Maybe I am. Margaret's final call of the morning was to her son, Michael. She had decided to be direct about her plans, even if she wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. Hi, Mom. Jessica told me you two talked yesterday. I hope you understand where we're coming from about Christmas. I do understand, Michael. That's actually why I'm calling. I've decided you're absolutely right about simplifying things. The relief in Michael's voice was unmistakable. Really? That's great, Mom. Jessica was worried you'd be upset. Not at all. In fact, I think you and Jessica should absolutely have the kind of Christmas you want. Simple, relaxed, no pressure. So we'll do something low-key at our house then? Maybe just order some food and... Actually, Michael, I've been thinking that maybe you and Jessica and the kids should have Christmas on your own this year. Just the four of you. Create your own new traditions without any interference from me. The silence stretched longer than Margaret expected. Mom, that's not what we meant. We didn't want to exclude you. Oh, I won't be alone, sweetie. I'm planning my own celebration with some friends who enjoy the traditional approach. People who don't find homemade cookies and family recipes to be too much work. Another pause. Mom, are you sure about this? The kids will be disappointed if they don't see you on Christmas. Margaret felt a pang at the mention of Emma and Tyler, but she pressed forward. Well, perhaps they could visit the day after Christmas, if they'd like, or maybe New Year's Day. We could start a new tradition of our own. I don't think Jessica expected. Michael, your wife was very clear about what your family needs. I'm simply giving you exactly what she asked for. A simple Christmas without elaborate traditions or complicated expectations. But Mom, sweetheart, this isn't a punishment. It's a gift. You'll have the relaxed family time you want, and I'll have the kind of celebration that brings me joy. Everyone wins. After hanging up, Margaret sat quietly for a moment. The conversation with Michael had been harder than she'd expected, but she felt oddly liberated. For the first time in years, she would be planning Christmas for people who genuinely wanted to be there. Thursday afternoon arrived quickly. Harold Brennan's office overlooked the town square, where workers were hanging garland from the lampposts. Margaret watched them from the conference room window while Harold reviewed her current will. Everything seems to be in order from a legal standpoint, Harold said, looking up from the documents. What changes did you want to make? Margaret pulled out a handwritten list. I want to make some specific adjustments to the bequests for Michael and his family. Harold put on his reading glasses and waited. Currently, Michael inherits the house and the majority of my assets, with provisions for Emma and Tyler's education. I want to change that. In what way? I want to leave the house to David Williams instead, Robert's nephew. He's always appreciated what this house represents, and he has the means to maintain it properly. Harold made notes but didn't comment. Margaret continued. For Michael, I want to leave him my investment portfolio, but I want to remove the house and all family heirlooms from his inheritance. What about the children's education funds? Those stay the same. Emma and Tyler shouldn't suffer because their parents don't value family history. Harold looked up. Margaret, can I ask what prompted these changes? Have you and Michael had some kind of falling out? Margaret chose her words carefully. Harold, Michael has made it clear that my traditions and the things I value are burdens to his family. His wife considers my holiday celebrations too much work. They want to simplify their lives and focus on what matters to them. I see. So I'm giving them exactly what they want. Michael will inherit enough money to create whatever kind of life makes him happy, without being burdened by a house full of old furniture and family heirlooms that his wife finds complicated. Harold set down his pen. And the family pieces? China, the furniture, the decorations? David gets the house and everything in it. He's always loved hearing stories about family history. And I want to set aside some specific items for Patricia, Morrison's daughter Sarah. She's shown more interest in learning family recipes than anyone in my actual family. Margaret, I have to ask, are you making these decisions in anger? Margaret considered the question seriously. No, Harold. I'm making them with clarity. I spent years assuming that my family treasured the same things I did. Jessica's phone call helped me realize that assumption was wrong. I don't want my possessions to become obligations for people who don't value them. Harold made more notes. What about your Christmas decorations? The things Robert made? Those go to David, too. He'll understand their significance. And you're certain about this? Margaret looked out the window again, where a young family was walking through the square, their children running ahead to look at the holiday displays. Harold, let me ask you something. If you spent 30 years collecting things that held deep meaning for you, would you want them to end up in someone's garage sale because they were seen as clutter? Harold winced slightly. I understand your point. My son will be well provided for financially, but the things that represent our family's history will go to people who won't see them as burdens. They spent the next hour working through the details. Margaret was specific about every item, every bequest, every condition. She wanted David to understand that the house came with the responsibility of maintaining family traditions. She wanted Patricia's daughter to have her grandmother's recipe collection and the china that went with it. There's one more thing, Margaret said as they finished. I don't want Michael to know about these changes until after I'm gone. That's your right, of course. But Margaret, have you considered talking to him about how you're feeling? Maybe there's room for compromise. Margaret thought about Jessica's dismissive tone, about Michael's relief when she'd agreed to step back from family celebrations. Harold, some bridges are burned by silence, not by conflict. My son has made his choices clear through his wife's words and his own lack of objection to them. If you're sure this is what you want. I've never been more certain of anything. As Margaret left Harold's office, she felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of trying to maintain relationships with people who didn't value what she offered had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time since Robert's death, she was looking forward to Christmas with genuine excitement. She had 3 weeks to plan the kind of celebration she actually wanted to have. 3 weeks to cook for people who would appreciate her efforts, to create an atmosphere of warmth and tradition for guests who wouldn't see it as work. 3 weeks to show the difference between obligation and joy. The days following Margaret's meeting with Harold passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt nothing like the Christmas preparations she was accustomed to. Instead of the familiar routine of baking dozens of cookies for people who considered them too much work, she found herself energized by planning a celebration for guests who genuinely wanted to be there. David called from San Diego 3 days. After their initial conversation, his excitement palpable even across the country. Aunt Margaret, I've been thinking about this nonstop. I booked my flight for December 23rd, and I'll stay through New Year's if that's okay with you. That would be perfect, David. I'm so glad you're coming. I have to admit, I'm curious about what changed. Last time we talked, you mentioned Michael and Jessica were coming as usual. Margaret measured her words carefully. Sometimes circumstances shift, and we have to adapt. Let's just say I decided to prioritize people who actually want to participate in family traditions. David's silence suggested he understood more than he was saying. Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. I've missed your Christmas cookies more than you know. Speaking of which, do you remember your Uncle Robert's recipe for eggnog? The one with the bourbon? Do I remember it? I've been trying to recreate it for years with no success. Margaret smiled. Well, you're in luck. I plan to make it this year, and I'll teach you the secret ingredient your uncle never wrote down. There's a secret ingredient? Vanilla bean paste and a touch of maple syrup. But don't tell anyone I told you. Meanwhile, Patricia Morrison had become Margaret's enthusiastic co-conspirator. The two women spent hours on the phone discussing menu plans, gift ideas, and decorating schemes. Patricia's daughter, Sarah, a 30-year-old teacher who lived nearby, had volunteered to help with preparations. "Mom, I hope you realize what you're getting us into," Sarah told Patricia during one of their planning sessions at Margaret's house. "Mrs. Williams doesn't do anything halfway." Margaret laughed from the kitchen where she was making tea. "Sarah, dear, call me Margaret, and you're absolutely right. When I commit to something, I commit completely." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," Sarah replied. "My ex-husband thought elaborate holiday celebrations were too commercial. I haven't had a real Christmas in 5 years." The comment hit Margaret with unexpected force. Here was a young woman who had been denied the very traditions that Jessica found burdensome. "Well, this year we're going to make up for lost time." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I help with everything? The baking, the decorating, the cooking?" I was hoping you'd ask. "In fact, I have some family recipes I'd love to share with someone who would appreciate them." As the weeks progressed, Margaret noticed how different her preparations felt when done with willing participants. Sarah arrived every weekend to help with advanced baking, and her genuine enthusiasm reminded Margaret why she had fallen in love with holiday traditions in the first place. "This dough is incredible," Sarah said, rolling out sugar cookies on Margaret's marble pastry board. "The texture is completely different from anything I've made before." "That's because of the cream cheese," Margaret explained. "My grandmother's secret. It makes the cookies tender and helps them hold their shape. Would you mind if I wrote down all these recipes? I'd love to be able to make them for my own family someday." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Sarah, I would be honored to share them with you. In fact, I have all my grandmother's and mother's recipes written out in a special book. I'll make you a copy." "You would do that for me?" Margaret looked at the young woman who was carefully cutting out star-shaped cookies with the same metal cutters Margaret had used for decades. "Honey, traditions are only meaningful when they're passed on to people who will treasure them." The conversation was interrupted by Margaret's phone ringing. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "Hi, Michael. How are you?" "Mom, I need to ask you something." Emma came home from school yesterday asking why she wasn't invited to help make Christmas cookies this year. Apparently, her friend's grandmother mentioned seeing you at the grocery store with some other woman buying baking supplies. Margaret glanced at Sarah, who was pretending not to listen while focusing intently on her cookie cutting. "I've been doing some baking with Patricia Morrison's daughter. You remember Patricia, don't you? She was at your father's funeral. But, Mom, Emma was really upset. She said she always helps you with cookies. Michael, I distinctly remember Jessica telling me that the children were more interested in their tablets and video games than standing around in a hot kitchen. I was simply following her guidance." "That's not—" "Mom, that's not what she meant." "What did she mean then?" Michael's frustration was audible. "She just meant that maybe we could simplify things, not that the kids didn't want to participate. At all." Margaret set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Michael, let me ask you something. When Jessica called my holiday traditions too much work, did you disagree with her?" The pause was telling. "It's not that simple, Mom." "It seems quite simple to me. Either you value family traditions or you don't. Either you want your children to learn about their heritage, or you prefer they focus on other things. Mom, you're twisting this around. We never said we didn't want the kids to be involved. No, Michael, you didn't say that. Jessica said that. And you agreed with her. Remember, you told me you were worried about me maintaining elaborate traditions at my age. Another silence. I was worried about you overextending yourself. Well, you don't need to worry anymore. I'm having a wonderful time preparing for Christmas with people who don't consider my efforts to be work. Mom, can we please talk about this? Maybe we can find a compromise. Margaret looked around her kitchen, filled with the warm scents of cinnamon and vanilla, where Sarah was now carefully placing cookies on cooling racks with the same attention to detail that Emma had shown in previous years. Michael, I think we've talked enough. You and Jessica should have exactly the kind of Christmas you want. Relaxed, simple, no pressure. That's what makes you happy. But what about the kids? The children will adapt. They're resilient, and they'll learn to appreciate the new traditions you create for them. After hanging up, Margaret found herself shaking slightly. Sarah immediately moved to her side. Are you okay, Margaret? I'm fine, dear. Just some family complications. Sarah hesitated before speaking. I hope I'm not overstepping, but it sounds like your son is starting to realize what he's giving up. Margaret considered this. Perhaps. But realizing something and being willing to change are two different things. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Margaret was in her living room, arranging fresh evergreen boughs on the mantelpiece, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, she saw Jessica's car in the driveway. Margaret opened the door to find Jessica standing on her porch, looking uncomfortable but determined. Jessica. This is a surprise. Hi, Margaret. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was wondering if we could talk. Margaret stepped aside to let her in. Of course. Would you like some tea? That would be nice, thank you. As Margaret prepared tea in the kitchen, she could hear Jessica moving around the living room. When she returned with the tray, Jessica was standing by the mantelpiece looking at the family photos displayed there. The house looks beautiful, Jessica said, accepting her cup. You've outdone yourself with the decorations this year. Thank you. I've been enjoying the process more than usual. Jessica sat down on the sofa, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding about our conversation last week. Oh, how so? I never meant to suggest that we didn't want to be part of your Christmas celebrations. I was just hoping we could maybe scale things back a little. Margaret sipped her tea thoughtfully. Jessica, you told me that my traditions were too much work, and that the children would be just as happy with pizza and store-bought cookies. You suggested that Emma and Tyler had no attachment to family recipes or heirloom china. Were those not your actual feelings? Jessica's cheeks flushed slightly. I may have expressed myself poorly. I was feeling overwhelmed, and I took it out on you. Overwhelmed by what exactly? By the expectations? By feeling like I could never measure up to your standards? By worrying that the kids would break something valuable or that I'd use the wrong serving dish? Margaret set down her cup. Jessica, in the 10 years you've been part of this family, have I ever criticized you for using the wrong serving dish? No. But have I ever made you feel unwelcome or inadequate? Not intentionally, but Margaret, you have to understand. You make everything look so effortless, so perfect. It's intimidating. Margaret felt a wave of sadness. Jessica, I never wanted you to feel intimidated. I wanted you to feel included. I know that now, and I'm sorry for how I handled it. But Margaret, Michael told me about your conversation yesterday, about Emma being upset. I never meant for the children to be excluded from family traditions. Margaret studied her daughter-in-law's face, looking for genuine remorse versus damage control. What exactly are you asking for, Jessica? I'm asking if we can start over. Maybe find a middle ground where everyone feels comfortable. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Jessica, I appreciate you coming here today. I really do. But I think it's too late for middle ground. What do you mean? I mean that I've already made other plans. Plans with people who genuinely want to participate in family traditions, not people who see them as obligations to be managed or minimized. Jessica's face fell. So we're not invited for Christmas? You're welcome to visit after the holidays. Of course. But this year, I'm celebrating with people who don't find my efforts to be work. As Jessica left, Margaret felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The conversation had confirmed what she already knew. The damage to their relationship went deeper than a single phone call. It would take more than an apology to rebuild trust that had been years in the eroding. The morning of December 22nd arrived with a fresh blanket of snow that transformed Margaret's neighborhood into a winter wonderland. She stood at her kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the white landscape in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in 3 years since Robert's death, she felt genuinely excited about the holidays ahead. David's flight was scheduled to arrive at 2:30 p.m., and Margaret had spent the previous evening preparing his room exactly as it had been during his childhood visits. The same navy blue comforter, the same family photos on the dresser, even the same stack of books on the nightstand that he used to read during long winter afternoons. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. On my way over with the final batch of rum balls. Can't wait to see David's face when he tries them. Margaret smiled. Sarah had thrown herself into the Christmas preparations with an enthusiasm that reminded Margaret of her younger self. Over the past 2 weeks, the two women had developed a genuine friendship built on shared appreciation for culinary traditions and attention to detail. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Margaret opened it to find Patricia and Sarah on her doorstep, both carrying covered dishes and wearing matching aprons that Patricia had sewn for the occasion. "Good morning, Christmas headquarters," Patricia announced cheerfully. "Reporting. For final preparations duty," Sarah held up a container of her rum balls. "I followed your grandmother's recipe exactly, but I'm terrified they won't taste right." Margaret lifted the lid and inhaled deeply. The rich aroma of rum, chocolate, and pecans filled the air. "Sarah, these smell absolutely perfect. Your grandmother would be proud." "Actually, they're your grandmother's recipe now," Sarah said with a grin. "I hope you don't mind, but I've already decided these are going to become a tradition in my family." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest. "That's exactly what traditions are for, sweetheart, to be passed on and treasured." The three women settled into a comfortable rhythm of final preparations. Patricia arranged fresh flowers throughout the house, Sarah worked on last-minute appetizers, and Margaret focused on the centerpiece for tomorrow's dinner table, an elaborate arrangement of winter greenery, candles, and antique ornaments that had graced family tables for generations. At noon, Margaret's phone rang. Michael's name on the screen made her stomach tighten, but she answered calmly. "Hi, Michael. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" Margaret glanced at Patricia and Sarah, who were pretending not to listen while they worked. "I'm rather busy today, Michael. Is it urgent?" "Mom, please. I think we need to clear the air before tomorrow. I'm not sure what needs to be cleared. You're having the simple Christmas you wanted, and I'm having the traditional one I prefer. Everyone's happy." "That's just it, Mom. Nobody's happy. Jessica feels terrible about how she handled things. The kids are confused and upset, and I'm caught in the middle." Margaret set down her coffee cup with a gentle clink. "Michael, you were never caught in the middle. You made a choice to support your wife's position. That's exactly what a good husband should do. But I never meant for it to go this far. How far did you think it would go? Did you imagine I would continue to spend weeks preparing elaborate celebrations for people who consider them burdensome?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Margaret wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Michael spoke. his voice quieter than before. "Mom, can I ask you something? Are you doing this to punish us?" Margaret looked around her kitchen, where Patricia was humming while she arranged cookies on a silver platter, and Sarah was carefully piping frosting onto petit fours with an expression of intense concentration. "Michael, does this look like punishment to you? I'm surrounded by people who are genuinely excited about celebrating together. People who appreciate homemade food and family traditions. People who don't see my efforts as work. But Mom, we're your family." "Yes, you are. And families sometimes grow apart when their values no longer align." Another long pause. "Mom, would you be willing to see the kids today? Just for a little while? They have Christmas presents for you, and Emma especially is really struggling with all this." Margaret's resolve wavered at the mention of her grandchildren. Despite everything, she adored Emma and Tyler, and the thought of them being caught in this family conflict pained her. "Michael, of course I love those children. But I won't pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. If you want to bring them by for a short visit this afternoon, that would be acceptable. But I won't mislead them about our Christmas plans." "Thank you, Mom. We'll be there around 4. After hanging up, Margaret found Patricia and Sarah both looking at her with expressions of concern. "That sounded difficult," Patricia said gently. "The hardest part is the children," Margaret admitted. "They don't understand why adult relationships sometimes become complicated." Sarah moved to Margaret's side. "Do you want us to leave when they come? Give you some privacy?" Margaret considered this. "Actually, I think it might be helpful for Michael to see that I'm not sitting here brooding or plotting revenge. I'm genuinely enjoying myself with friends who share my interests." At 3:30, Margaret left for the airport to collect David. She hadn't seen Robert's nephew in person for 2 years, and she was curious to see how he'd changed. The successful architect had always been handsome in a quiet, thoughtful way that reminded her of Robert at that age. She spotted him immediately at baggage claim, his tall frame and salt and pepper hair making him easy to find in the crowd. When he saw her, his face broke into the genuine smile she remembered from his childhood. "Aunt." "Margaret!" He enveloped her in a warm hug that smelled like expensive cologne and airplane coffee. "You look wonderful." "You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the sentiment," Margaret laughed. "How was your flight?" "Long, but worth it. I can't believe I'm actually here for Christmas. It feels like being a kid again." During the drive home, David caught her up on his work projects and his recent travels, but Margaret sensed he was carefully avoiding the topic of why he was visiting alone this year. "David, you can ask me about Michael and Jessica. I know you're curious." He glanced at her profile as she drove. "I have to admit, I was surprised when you invited me without mentioning them. Last time we talked, you were excited about watching Emma and Tyler open their presents." Margaret told him an abbreviated version of Jessica's phone call and the subsequent conversations. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as she spoke. "So they essentially told you that everything you've done for years to make Christmas special was too much trouble," he summarized. "That's a fair assessment. And now they're surprised that you've taken them at their word?" "Apparently so." David shook his head. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think you're handling this exactly right. When I was a kid, those Christmases at your house were magical. The attention to detail, the way you made everyone feel special, the traditions that connected us to family history, that stuff matters." "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being stubborn or petty. You're being authentic. There's a difference." When they arrived at the house, Patricia and Sarah were putting finishing touches on the guest bedroom and setting out appetizers in the living room. David's reunion with Patricia, whom he remembered from previous visits, was warm and natural. His meeting with Sarah was marked by immediate mutual respect. "So you're the one who's been helping Margaret with all the preparations," David said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I hope you know what you've gotten yourself into." Sarah laughed. I've been having the time of my life. Your aunt is an amazing teacher. She taught me how to make her famous dinner rolls when I was 12. I still use that recipe for special occasions. Margaret felt a deep satisfaction watching the easy interaction between David and her new friends. This was what Christmas should feel like: natural, warm, inclusive. At exactly 4 o'clock, Michael's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Margaret could see Emma and Tyler in the back seat, their faces pressed against the glass as they looked at the house decorated with its usual elaborate Christmas display. Michael approached the front door alone, leaving Jessica in the car with the children. When Margaret opened it, she could see the strain in her son's face. "Hi, Mom. The kids are excited to see you." "Bring them in. Patricia and Sarah, I'd like you to meet my son Michael and my grandchildren." Emma and Tyler bounded into the house with the energy of children who had been cooped up in a car. Both of them immediately ran to Margaret for hugs, and she felt her heart constrict at their familiar warmth. "Grandma, the house looks so pretty," Emma exclaimed, spinning around to take in all the decorations. "You did the tree differently this year." Margaret had indeed arranged the ornaments with extra care, placing some of Robert's handmade pieces in more prominent positions. "Do you like it, sweetheart?" "I love it." "Can I show Tyler the angel Uncle Robert made? The one with the real gold wings?" "Of course you can." As the children explored the familiar decorations with obvious delight, Margaret watched Michael take in the scene. Patricia and Sarah were chatting easily with David, who was regaling them with stories of Margaret's legendary Christmas morning. Pancakes. The atmosphere was festive and warm, filled with the kind of genuine contentment that Margaret had been missing for years. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "this feels like the Christmases I remember from when I was their age." "That's because everyone here actually wants to be here," Margaret replied, watching Emma carefully examine a delicate glass ornament. "There's no pressure, no resentment, no one wishing they were somewhere else." Tyler appeared at Margaret's elbow, holding a small wrapped package. "Grandma, can I give you your present early? I made it myself." Margaret's throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart." She unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a construction paper card decorated with glitter and stickers. Inside, in Tyler's careful second-grade handwriting, was a message. "Dear Grandma, thank you for making Christmas magical. I love your cookies and your stories. Love, Tyler." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "Tyler, this is the most beautiful card I've ever received." Emma rushed over with her own gift, a small photo frame she had decorated with painted pasta shapes. Inside was a picture of Margaret and both children from the previous Christmas, all three of them laughing while decorating cookies. "I made this in art class," Emma announced proudly. "Mrs. Henderson said it was very creative." Margaret held both gifts carefully, overwhelmed by the children's obvious love and the painful irony of receiving heartfelt appreciation from grandchildren whose parents had dismissed her efforts as burdensome. "These are wonderful, both of you. I'll treasure them always." Michael cleared his throat. "Kids, why don't you go look at the decorations in the dining room? I need to talk to Grandma for a minute." After they left, Michael sat down beside Margaret on the sofa. "Mom, seeing them here, seeing how happy they are with all this, it's making me realize some things." "What kind of things?" "Maybe Jessica and I got so caught up in trying to simplify our lives that we forgot what we were simplifying away." Margaret nodded but didn't speak. "Those cards they made you, they've been working on them for weeks. Emma asked me 3 times if she could come help you bake cookies this year. Tyler told his teacher that his grandma makes the best Christmas dinner in the world. Michael, your children are wonderful, but they're not the ones who decided my traditions were too much work." "I know. And I'm starting to understand that Jessica's anxiety about not measuring up to your standards became a way of avoiding the whole thing entirely." Margaret looked toward the dining room, where she could hear the children's excited voices as they discovered new decorations. "Michael, Your wife is welcome to feel however she wants about family traditions, but she's not welcome to dismiss mine as meaningless. I understand that now. The question is there any way to fix this? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, watching David show Emma how to carefully hold one of Robert's carved ornaments. Michael, some things can't be fixed. They can only be accepted and moved past. So this is it? We're just done? We're not done being family. But we might be done pretending we want the same things. As Michael and the children prepared to leave, Emma clung to Margaret's hand. Grandma? Can I come back tomorrow to help serve dinner? I promise I'll be careful with the good plates. Margaret's heart broke a little more. Sweetheart, tomorrow is going to be different this year, but maybe we can have a special dinner just for you and Tyler sometime soon. Like a Christmas practice? Something like that. After they left, Margaret sat quietly in her living room, surrounded by Patricia, Sarah, and David. The contrast between the children's obvious joy at being in her home and their parents' discomfort with her traditions felt like a chasm she didn't know how to bridge. Those are beautiful children, Sarah said gently. They are. And they're caught in the middle of something that isn't their fault. David moved to sit beside her. Margaret, you know there's no perfect solution here, right? Someone's going to be hurt no matter what you do. I know. But I also know that I can't keep pouring my heart into celebrations for people who see them as obligations. It's not fair to any of us. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is stop enabling patterns that don't serve anyone. That evening, as they sat around Margaret's kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of soup and homemade bread, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was exactly where she wanted to be, with people who valued the same things she did. The Christmas she had planned might not include her son's family, but it would be authentic in a way her celebrations hadn't been for a long time. And perhaps, she thought as she watched David and Sarah debate the merits of different cookie recipes, that authenticity was worth more than keeping everyone comfortable. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes with fresh snow and bright winter sunshine. Margaret woke at dawn, not from anxiety as she had in recent years, but from genuine anticipation. Today would be the first Christmas Eve in over a decade that she was celebrating with people who truly wanted to be there. She found David already awake in the kitchen, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, still in his pajamas and robe. You're up early for someone on vacation, Margaret said, joining him with her own cup. Old habits. Besides, I wanted to help with breakfast before the day gets too hectic. I remember you always made those incredible cinnamon rolls on Christmas Eve morning. Margaret smiled. I was planning to make them this morning, actually. Would you like to help? I seem to remember a 10-year-old boy who was very good at rolling out dough. That 10-year-old boy is now 42 and probably less coordinated. But I'm willing to try. They worked together in comfortable silence, David proving to be surprisingly adept at the delicate process of rolling the sweet dough without tearing it. Margaret found herself remembering other Christmas mornings when the kitchen had been filled with family members helping with breakfast preparations. David, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret not having children? Not carrying on the family traditions yourself? David paused in his rolling, considering the question carefully. I used to think I did. But watching what you're going through with Michael and Jessica, I'm starting to think that having children doesn't guarantee they'll value what you try to pass on to them. That's a rather sad way to look at it. Maybe. Or maybe it's realistic. The traditions that matter are the ones people choose to embrace, not the ones they inherit by default. Margaret nodded thoughtfully as she prepared the glaze for the cinnamon rolls. Sarah has shown more genuine interest in learning family recipes than anyone in my immediate family has in years. And that's not an accident. She's choosing to connect with these traditions because they speak to something in her. That makes them more meaningful, not less. Patricia and Sarah arrived at 10 o'clock, both carrying shopping bags and wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "Final preparations committee reporting for duty," Patricia announced, setting down, her bags in the front hallway. Sarah immediately went to the kitchen where the aroma of fresh cinnamon rolls still lingered. "Margaret, you made your famous breakfast rolls. I was hoping you would." David helped. He's got his uncle's hands for working with dough. David looked pleased with the compliment. High praise from the woman who taught me everything I know about baking. The next few hours passed in a flurry of organized activity. Patricia took charge of setting the dining room table with Margaret's finest china and crystal, arranging each place setting with the precision of someone who understood that presentation mattered. Sarah worked alongside Margaret in the kitchen, preparing appetizers and side dishes for the evening meal. David proved surprisingly useful as a general assistant, reaching high shelves, carrying heavy serving pieces, and providing entertainment, with stories of his architectural projects and travels. At 2 o'clock, Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw Michael's name, but chose not to answer. She was in the middle of preparing her grandmother's stuffing recipe, a complex process that required her full attention and couldn't be interrupted by difficult conversations. The call went to voicemail, followed immediately by a text message. "Mom, please call me back, it's important." Margaret showed the message to Patricia, who was polishing wine glasses nearby. "Do you want to call him back?" Patricia asked. "Not particularly. Today is about celebrating with people who want to be here. If Michael has something urgent to discuss, he can leave a detailed message." 20 minutes later, her phone rang again. This time it was Jessica calling, and Margaret was even less inclined to answer. Sarah looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Margaret, you don't owe anyone explanations today. You've made your position clear, and you deserve to enjoy your own celebration without drama." Margaret felt a surge of gratitude for Sarah's straightforward support. "You're absolutely right. Today is about joy, not guilt." At 4 o'clock, Eleanor Patterson arrived for Christmas Eve dinner, carrying a covered dish and wearing her best dress. At 86, Eleanor moved slowly but with dignity, and Margaret could see how much effort she had put into looking her best for the occasion. "Eleanor, you look absolutely lovely," Margaret said, helping her with her coat. "Well, it's not every day I get invited to such an elegant celebration. I brought my apple crisp, made with the recipe my mother used to make during the Depression." David immediately moved to Eleanor's side, offering his arm as she navigated the step down into the living room. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm David Williams, Robert's nephew. I've heard so much about you from Margaret." Eleanor's face lit up. "Oh, you're Robert's nephew. My goodness, you look just like him at that age. Your uncle was such a gentleman, always helping me with my groceries and checking on me during storms." Margaret watched the easy interaction between David and Eleanor, feeling a deep satisfaction. This was what family should look like. People of different generations connecting with kindness and genuine interest in each other. As the group gathered in the living room for appetizers and conversation, Margaret realized she couldn't remember the last time her Christmas Eve had felt so relaxed and natural. There was no undercurrent of tension, no one checking their phones constantly, no sense that people were enduring the evening rather than enjoying it. Patricia regaled them with stories of her late husband's attempts at Christmas cooking, which had apparently been legendary disasters that became beloved family memories. Sarah shared tales of her elementary school students' holiday preparations, their innocent excitement and creative interpretations of Christmas traditions. David contributed stories of Christmas celebrations in different countries he had visited for work, describing elaborate holiday markets in Germany and unique gift-giving customs in Japan. Eleanor, despite her age, proved to be an engaging storyteller, sharing memories of Christmases during wartime rationing, when families made do, with homemade gifts and simple pleasures took on profound meaning. "During the war, we thought we were so deprived," Eleanor said, sipping her sherry delicately. "But looking back, those were some of the most meaningful Christmases we ever had." When you can't buy elaborate gifts, you have to put love and creativity into everything you do. Margaret felt a chill of recognition. Eleanor, that's exactly what's been missing from Christmas for me in recent years. The sense that everything we do comes from love rather than obligation. Obligation is the enemy of joy, Eleanor said with the wisdom of her years. When people do things because they feel they have to rather than because they want to, it drains the meaning right out of them. As evening approached and they moved to the dining room for the formal meal, Margaret felt a profound sense of contentment. Her table looked exactly as she had envisioned it, with flickering candles casting warm light on the china and crystal, fresh evergreen arrangements filling the air with their crisp scent, and most importantly, faces around the table that reflected genuine happiness to be there. David had volunteered to carve the roast, taking over the role that Robert had always filled with such ceremony. Margaret watched him perform the task with careful attention, clearly understanding the significance of the moment. "Before we begin," Margaret said, standing at the head of the table, "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This Christmas has reminded me what the holidays are supposed to feel like when they're celebrated with people who truly want to share in the traditions. Thank you for including us," Sarah said, raising her glass. "This has been like a dream, come true for me. And thank you for reminding an old bachelor what real family Christmas feels like," David added. "Being here has brought back so many wonderful memories." Eleanor smiled with tears in her eyes. "My dear, this is the most beautiful Christmas Eve I've had in years. You've made an old woman very happy," Patricia nodded in agreement. "Margaret, you've created something magical here. This is what Christmas should always feel like." As they began the meal, Margaret felt her phone buzzing repeatedly in her pocket. She ignored it, determined not to let external drama intrude on the peaceful evening she had created. The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic: travel stories, family memories, discussions of books and movies, gentle debates about cooking techniques. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in months, genuinely engaged with people who shared her interests and values. Halfway through the main course, Margaret excused herself to check on the desserts in the kitchen. David followed her, carrying empty serving dishes. "Margaret, I have to tell you something," he said as they worked together to prepare the dessert course. "This is the most relaxed I've seen you in years. Even before Uncle Robert died, you always seemed stressed during holiday celebrations, like you were trying to make everything perfect for people who didn't really appreciate it." Margaret paused in her arrangement of cookies on a silver platter. "You noticed that?" "Hard not to. You'd spend weeks preparing, and then spend the actual celebrations making sure everyone else was happy instead of enjoying yourself. I thought that was what being a good hostess meant. There's a difference between good hospitality and martyrdom. Tonight, you're actually participating in your own celebration instead of just orchestrating it for other people." Margaret realized he was right. She had been fully present for every conversation, had laughed at Patricia's stories, had enjoyed Eleanor's wisdom, had felt genuine pleasure in Sarah's enthusiasm. She wasn't monitoring everyone else's comfort or worrying about whether the meal was meeting expectations. "It helps that everyone here actually wants to be here," she said. "Exactly. When people appreciate what you're offering, you can relax and enjoy offering it." They returned to the dining room with dessert and coffee, and the evening continued with the same warm, natural rhythm. Margaret brought out the special Christmas china dessert plates, each one decorated with hand-painted holly leaves, and watched Sarah examine them with genuine interest. "These are exquisite," Sarah said. "Are they family pieces?" "They belonged to my grandmother. Each plate was painted by hand by a local artist in Boston in 1923. The detail is incredible. Look at how each holly leaf is slightly different." Eleanor leaned over to examine the plates. "My mother had similar dishes, though not nearly as fine as these," She always said that beautiful things should be used, not just displayed. That's exactly what my grandmother believed, Margaret replied. She said, what was the point of having nice things if you were afraid to enjoy them? David raised his coffee cup. A toast to grandmothers who understood that life is meant to be lived beautifully. As the evening wound down and Margaret's guests began to gather their coats and prepare to leave, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The Christmas Eve she had created was everything she had hoped it would be. Elegant, warm, meaningful, and authentic. Eleanor was the last to leave, and she took Margaret's hands in her own as she prepared to go. My dear, I want you to know that tonight reminded me why traditions matter, not because they're obligations, but because they're gifts we give to each other. Thank you for the gift of this beautiful evening. After everyone had gone and David had retired to his room, Margaret sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the soft glow of Christmas lights and the lingering warmth of genuine celebration. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, all from Michael and Jessica. She scrolled through a few of the messages. Mom, please call us back. We need to talk about Christmas Day. The kids are really upset. Can we please work something out? Mom, this has gone too far. We're family. Jessica feels terrible about everything. Can't we start over? Margaret set her phone aside without responding. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had been perfect in a way her Christmas celebrations hadn't been for years. She had proven to herself that the traditions she cherished could still bring joy when shared with people who valued them. For the first time since Robert's death, Margaret felt genuinely hopeful about the future. She had rediscovered the difference between hospitality offered from love and hospitality performed from duty. She had remembered what it felt like to celebrate with people who appreciated her efforts rather than endured them. As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Margaret realized that losing Michael and Jessica's participation in her Christmas traditions had actually allowed her to reclaim their true meaning. Sometimes, she thought as she climbed the stairs, the best gift you can give yourself is the freedom to stop trying to please people who don't want to be pleased. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and it would be different from any Christmas she had celebrated in decades. But tonight had convinced her that different didn't necessarily mean worse. Sometimes different meant better. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight streaming through the frost-covered windows of Margaret's bedroom. She woke naturally at 7 o'clock, feeling more rested than she had on Christmas morning in years. No anxiety, no mental checklist of last-minute preparations, just quiet anticipation for the day ahead. Downstairs, she found David already in the kitchen, wearing Robert's old Christmas apron and working on what appeared to be pancake batter. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Margaret," he said, wrapping her in a warm hug. "I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to surprise you with Christmas morning. Pancakes! I found Uncle Robert's recipe in his old cookbook." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Robert had always made his special Christmas pancakes. Light, fluffy creations flavored with vanilla and a touch of eggnog. She had stopped making them after his death because the memory had been too painful. "David, that's the most thoughtful thing anyone has done for me in a long time. I figured it was time to bring back some of Uncle Robert's traditions. He would have wanted Christmas morning to start with his pancakes." As they cooked together, Margaret's phone began ringing. Michael's name appeared on the screen, followed immediately by a text. "Mom, we're coming over. The kids need to see you on Christmas morning." Margaret showed the message to David, who frowned as he flipped a pancake. "Are you going to respond?" "I think I need to. They clearly haven't accepted that this Christmas is different." She typed back, "Michael, I'm having Christmas with friends today. You and Jessica chose to create your own new traditions, remember? I hope you have a lovely day with your family." Her phone immediately began ringing again. This time she answered. "Michael, I meant what I said in my text. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just exclude your own family from Christmas." "I'm not excluding anyone. You and Jessica made it clear that my Christmas traditions were too much work for your family. So you're having the simple celebration you wanted, and I'm having the traditional one I prefer. But Mom, the children will be fine, Michael. They'll learn to appreciate the new traditions you create for them. Mom, please. Jessica is in tears. The kids don't understand why they can't come to Grandma's house, and I feel like our family is falling apart. Margaret looked at David, who was quietly setting the table, but clearly listening to every word. She thought about Emma and Tyler, probably confused and disappointed by the sudden change in their Christmas routine. Michael, your family isn't falling apart. It's just changing. Sometimes change is necessary when people grow in different directions. So that's it? You're just writing us off? I'm not writing anyone off, but I'm also not going to continue pouring my heart into celebrations for people who see them as burdens. It's not fair to any of us. After she hung up, Margaret sat quietly at her kitchen table, suddenly feeling the weight of her decision. David placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Having second thoughts? About the children, yes. About everything else, no. The children. Will be okay, Margaret. And maybe this experience will teach them to value things they previously took for granted. At 9 o'clock, Patricia and Sarah arrived together, both carrying wrapped gifts and wearing bright smiles that immediately lifted Margaret's spirits. "Merry Christmas!" Sarah called out, setting down her packages and immediately enveloping Margaret in a hug. "How are you feeling today?" "Better now that you're here," Margaret replied honestly. Patricia handed her a beautifully wrapped package. "This is from both Sarah and me. We wanted to give you something special." Margaret carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a handmade recipe book, bound in leather and filled with blank pages decorated with watercolor illustrations of kitchen utensils and holiday scenes. "We thought you might like to write down all your family recipes," Sarah explained. "The ones you've been teaching me, and any others you'd like to preserve. That way, the traditions can be passed on to people who will appreciate them." Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. "This is beautiful, absolutely beautiful." "Sarah did the illustrations," Patricia said proudly. "She's quite the artist when she's not teaching elementary school." Margaret spent the next hour opening gifts with her chosen family. David had brought her a first-edition cookbook from the 1940s, knowing her love of historical recipes. Patricia had knitted her a gorgeous wool scarf in Margaret's favorite shade, of deep blue. Sarah presented her with a small potted herb garden, complete with all the herbs Margaret used most frequently in her cooking. "I thought you might enjoy having fresh herbs year-round," Sarah explained. "And maybe you could teach me more about cooking with fresh ingredients." The gifts were thoughtful and personal, in a way that showed how well these people had come to know her in just a few short weeks. Margaret realized that she had been so focused on maintaining traditions with people who didn't appreciate them that she had forgotten how wonderful it felt to be truly seen and understood. At 10:30, Eleanor arrived for Christmas Day brunch, moving slowly but with obvious determination to be part of the celebration. "I brought my famous coffee cake," Eleanor announced, handing a covered dish to David. "Made with real butter and my secret ingredient." "What's the secret ingredient?" Sarah asked with genuine curiosity. Eleanor winked. "Love, dear, always love." As they gathered around Margaret's dining room table for brunch, the conversation was lively and warm. David regaled them with stories of Christmas mornings from his childhood, when Robert would wake him early to help with breakfast preparations. Patricia shared memories of Christmas traditions from her own family and how she had modified them over the years to fit her circumstances. Sarah talked about her plans to start new traditions in her own life, inspired by everything she had learned from Margaret over the past few weeks. "I'm going to start hosting Christmas Eve dinners for my single friends," Sarah announced. "People who don't have family nearby or who just want to be part of something special." "That's a wonderful idea," Margaret said, feeling a surge of pride in her protégé. "Family isn't always about blood relationships." Eleanor nodded approvingly. Some of the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. At noon, Margaret's doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the window, she could see Michael's car in the driveway, with Jessica and the children waiting inside. Margaret opened the door to find Michael standing on her porch, holding a large wrapped gift and looking determined but uncomfortable. "Michael, I thought we discussed this." "Mom, I know what you said, but I can't let Christmas pass without trying one more time. The kids made you something special, and they're heartbroken that they can't give it to you." Margaret glanced back at her dining room, where her friends were tactfully continuing their conversation while clearly aware of the drama unfolding at the front door. "Michael, this isn't fair to anyone. You're putting the children in the middle of an adult conflict." "I'm trying to fix an adult conflict. Mom, Jessica, and I have been talking all night. We realize we made a huge mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "We got so caught up in trying to simplify our lives that we forgot what we were simplifying away. We forgot that your traditions aren't work. They're gifts." Margaret studied her son's face, looking for sincerity beyond desperation. "Michael, 3 weeks ago your wife told me that my Christmas celebrations were too much trouble, and that your children would be just as happy with pizza and store-bought cookies. Now you're telling me that was a mistake?" "Yes. A huge mistake. We were wrong, Mom. Jessica was overwhelmed and took it out on you, and I should have defended you instead of going along with her." Margaret felt her resolve wavering as she thought about Emma and Tyler sitting in the car, probably wondering why they couldn't come inside their grandmother's house on Christmas morning. "What exactly are you asking for, Michael?" "A chance to start over. A chance to show you that we can appreciate what you do instead of taking it for granted." Margaret looked past Michael to the car, where she could see Emma's face pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the front door hopefully. "Michael, appreciation isn't something you can decide to feel. Either you value these traditions, or you don't." "We do value them, Mom. We just didn't realize how much until we thought we were going to lose them." David appeared at Margaret's shoulder, having quietly approached from the dining room. "Margaret, why don't you invite them in for a few minutes? Let the children give you their gift, and then you can decide what feels right." Margaret hesitated, then stepped aside to let Michael enter. "Just for a few minutes. I have guests who've been looking forward to spending Christmas Day with me." Michael's face showed surprise as he took in the festive scene in Margaret's dining room. Patricia, Sarah, and Eleanor were seated around the table, which was set with Margaret's finest china and decorated with fresh flowers. The atmosphere was warm and elegant, clearly the result of careful planning and genuine celebration. "Mom, this is beautiful," Michael said quietly. "It looks like the Christmases I remember from when I was a kid." "That's because everyone here actually wants to be here," Margaret replied. Jessica and the children came in from the car, both Emma and Tyler immediately running to Margaret for hugs. Jessica hung back, looking uncomfortable but trying to smile. "Merry Christmas, Margaret," Jessica said quietly. "Your home looks absolutely gorgeous." "Thank you." Emma tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Grandma, we made you something really special. Can we give it to you now?" Margaret's heart melted at her granddaughter's excitement. "Of course, sweetheart." Tyler handed her a large, flat package wrapped in paper they had clearly decorated themselves. Inside was a handmade scrapbook filled with photos of family Christmases. Over the years, each page carefully decorated with stickers and accompanied by handwritten notes. "We wanted to show you how much we love Christmas at your house," Emma explained eagerly. "Look, here's the picture of me helping you make cookies last year. And here's Tyler learning to set the table with the fancy plates." Margaret turned the pages slowly, seeing her Christmas celebrations through her grandchildren's eyes. Every photo showed genuine joy and engagement. Children who were clearly having the time of their lives participating in family traditions. "And here," Tyler said, pointing to the last page, "we wrote you a letter." In careful childish handwriting, the letter read, "Dear Grandma, Christmas at your house is the best because you make everything special. We love helping you cook and learning about great-grandma's recipes. We love the fancy dishes and the beautiful decorations. We love hearing stories about the old days. Thank you for making Christmas magical. Please don't stop. Love, Emma and Tyler. Margaret felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she finished reading. The children had created a powerful reminder of what she had been fighting to preserve, not just traditions, but the joy and connection that came from sharing them with people who appreciated their meaning. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, hugging both children tightly. Jessica stepped forward, her own eyes damp with tears. "Margaret, I owe you a huge apology. I let my own insecurities about not being perfect turn into resentment of your perfection. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to my children." "Jessica, please let me finish. I was so worried about not measuring up to your standards that I convinced myself your standards were the problem. But looking at this scrapbook, seeing how much joy Emma and Tyler get from your traditions, I realized that the problem was never your expectations. The problem was my fear of not meeting them." Margaret looked around her dining room, where her chosen family was quietly observing this unexpected reunion. Patricia nodded encouragingly, while Sarah gave her a thumbs up. Eleanor was wiping tears from her eyes, and David was smiling with obvious approval. "Margaret," Michael said, "I know, we hurt you. I know we took your love and generosity for granted. But if you're willing to give us another chance, we want to learn how to be the kind of family members who deserve what you offer." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She could maintain her position, continue with the Christmas she had planned, and send Michael's family away to create their simple celebration. Or she could take a risk on the possibility that this crisis had actually taught them something valuable. "There's something I need to tell all of you," she said finally. "After Jessica's phone call, I made some changes that can't be undone. I've revised my will." The room went completely silent. Michael's face paled, and Jessica looked stricken. "Mom, what kind of changes?" "I've removed the house and all family heirlooms from your inheritance, Michael. They're going to David now, someone who has always appreciated their significance." David looked shocked. "Margaret, I had no idea." "It's done, David. The house and everything in it will go to someone who won't see them as burdens to be managed or simplified away." Michael sat down heavily in one of Margaret's dining room chairs. "Mom, I understand that you're angry, but don't you think that's a bit extreme?" "It's not extreme, Michael. It's practical. I don't want my treasures to become obligations for people who don't value them." Jessica's face crumpled. "Margaret, I know I messed up, but please don't punish our children for my mistakes." "The children's education funds remain intact," Margaret said gently. "This isn't about punishment. It's about ensuring that family heirlooms go to people who will treasure them." Emma looked up from the scrapbook she was still holding. "Grandma, does this mean we can't come to your house anymore?" Margaret's heart broke at the confusion in her granddaughter's voice. "Oh, sweetheart, you can always come to my house. This is about what happens to the house after I'm gone, not about now." "But if Uncle David gets the house, will he keep all the Christmas decorations?" David knelt down to Emma's level. "Emma, if I'm fortunate enough to inherit this house someday, I promise that all the Christmas decorations will stay exactly where they are. And you and Tyler will always be welcome to help decorate the tree and make cookies, just like you do with your grandmother." Tyler perked up. "Really? You'd let us help?" "I would be honored to have your help. Your grandmother has taught me that the best traditions are the ones shared with people who love them." Margaret watched this exchange with growing emotion. The children's obvious love for the traditions she had maintained, David's sincere promise to preserve them, and even Jessica's tearful apology were all touching her deeply. "Margaret," Patricia said gently, "what does your heart tell you to do?" Margaret looked around the room at all the faces watching her expectantly. Her chosen family, who had given her the gift of authentic appreciation. Her biological family, who had perhaps learned to value what they had nearly lost. "My heart tells me that Christmas is about forgiveness and second chances," she said slowly. "And about family, however we define it." She turned to Michael and Jessica. "If you're serious about wanting to participate in family traditions instead of enduring them, then you're welcome to stay for Christmas dinner, but I need to be clear about something." "What?" Michael asked. "This isn't going back to the way things were. This is starting something new. If you stay, you participate fully. You help with preparations, you engage with the process, you show genuine appreciation for what we're creating together." Jessica nodded eagerly. "We want to do that. We want to learn." "And Jessica, if you ever again dismiss family traditions as too much work, this conversation is over permanently. I won't tolerate having my efforts minimized or my love taken for granted." "I understand completely. And Margaret, I promise you'll never hear those words from me again." Emma tugged on Margaret's sleeve again. "Grandma, does this mean we can help you finish making Christmas dinner?" Margaret smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. We can all help finish making Christmas dinner." As the expanded group moved into the kitchen to begin collaborative preparations, Margaret realized that the crisis had ultimately led to something better than what she had before. Her chosen family had shown her what authentic appreciation looked like, and that experience had given her the strength to demand the same from her biological family. The Christmas dinner that followed was unlike any Margaret had hosted before. Instead of one person doing all the work while others waited to be served, everyone participated. David taught Tyler how to carve the roast properly. Sarah showed Emma the secret to making perfect gravy. Patricia and Jessica worked together on the vegetable sides, with Patricia sharing cooking tips that Jessica actually listened to and implemented. Michael helped Eleanor navigate the kitchen safely, ensuring she felt included in the collaborative effort. Even the children had age-appropriate tasks, and their excitement at being genuine contributors rather than just observers was palpable. The conversation around the dinner table was richer than it had been in years. Stories were shared, traditions were explained, and new memories were created. Margaret found herself truly enjoying her own celebration, instead of just orchestrating it for others. As the evening wound down and the extended family prepared to leave, Margaret felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The day had not gone as planned, but it had ended better than she had dared to hope. Jessica approached her privately as they were cleaning up. "Margaret, I want you to know that I understand now why these traditions matter so much. It's not about the work or the perfection. It's about the love and connection they create. I'm glad you understand that now, Jessica. And I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to teach me? Really teach me, not just let me watch? I want to be able to carry on some of these traditions myself." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I would love to teach you, Jessica. That's all I ever wanted." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Margaret and David sat in the living room by the Christmas tree, sharing a final cup of eggnog. "So," David said, "are you going to change your will back?" Margaret considered this carefully. "I don't think so. Today showed me that intentions can change, but consistent actions over time matter more than good intentions in a crisis." "So I still inherit the house?" "You still inherit the house. But Michael and Jessica have earned the right to be part of its future. When that time comes, I hope you'll include them in decisions about family heirlooms and traditions." David nodded thoughtfully. "I think Uncle Robert would approve of how today turned out. I think he would too. He always believed that families were strongest when they chose to be together, not when they were obligated to be." Margaret looked around her living room, still decorated with all the Christmas beauty she had created, and felt a deep sense of peace. The traditions she had fought to preserve were now truly appreciated by everyone who participated in them. Her family relationships had been tested and strengthened rather than simply maintained. Most importantly, she had learned that authentic love and appreciation were worth fighting for, even when the fight was difficult and painful. Christmas had indeed been magical this year, not because everything went according to plan, but because it had ended with genuine connection and mutual respect. Sometimes, Margaret reflected, the best gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.